How can I set up a little script that will deploy my Microsoft Access front end from a network share to my user's local drive with a shortcut on the user's desktop, but then also every time they log in, check whether or not they have the latest version of my front end or not. I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie, and thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we're going to continue our little exploration into vbScript, and we're going to look at how to deploy Microsoft Access front end to a user's local C drive and make sure that they always have the current front end without you having to do anything as the developer, and have that run every time that they log in. So without further ado, let's get to our deploy script in vbScript. So wouldn't it be great if we had a little script that could sit in the user's startup folder that would say your application needs to be deployed since it's not there, and then if you said yes, it would create the folder, deploy the file, and create a shortcut on the desktop. And wouldn't that be great? Well, you can see here, if I open the file, the shortcut that was there, you can see the file is in use, the front end. But also, what if we ran it and the front end was out of date? You know, you put a new front end in your network folder. Well, we want it to check for that too. So that is what we're going to do today. And today we are going to use vbScript to do all of those things and more. So you might remember from our last episode, we did this cool stuff in a notepad document and then switched it to a vbScript. We opened an Access database and then opened a record set on one of the tables, and then we looped through the record set. We closed it and then we quit Access, but we put out some information about what we had done in a message box afterwards, and that was sort of like the eye-opener for vbScript. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk a lot more about some deployment considerations. So you can see here, this is a network shared drive that would be shared, amongst a whole bunch of different users. And I can open the file there. I'm opening up the backend file. I've copied some Candy tables into this file from our previous episodes. So you can see those are all just normal backend tables. And then my front end file I put in the same folder, which would be deployed out to users. And as you can see, the only local table is the FE settings table, so that goes with the file to the user's computer. But all the other tables are linked, so they don't hold any data. They only link to those backend tables that are sitting on the network. And so the question is that I'm often asked is, once you've split your database front end and back end, how can you deploy that to the user's computer and make sure that the front end's always up to date? And we can do that using our vbScript. And so what I'm using here now, I'm not using Notepad this time. I'm using Notepad++, which is a wonder to programmers all over the world. So you will definitely do yourself a favor if you don't have Notepad++ yet, to go and get a copy of that downloaded. So the main thing is, like we showed in the other video, we did the Open Candies script, and that's the one that you see there. And I'm just going to save this file that I just created. I'm going to call it something different. We had the other file that we looked at the other day there, and we're going to call this one my app setup. So this would be a little file that you can drop into the user's startup folder or the all users startup folder. You can also do that if all the users on that computer use your front end application in Access. So it would deploy it out for those guys too, and so that's what we would do here. So now you can see I've got my file on my desktop. It doesn't have any code in it yet, except for a comment there, a script to do some setup. And we're going to do it a little differently today compared to how we did it yesterday or in the previous episode. because we're going to use a little more advanced features of vbScript today. Notably, we're going to use some subs and functions just like we do in our regular in VBA, which you're very familiar with, and so we can use a lot of that same functionality that we would create subs for for different reasons. It makes the code a little bit cleaner and easier to fix and work on. And so today we're going to have a couple of functions and one or two subs, and that's about it. So we're going to get some variables set up here. Now in vbScript, if you guys remember from the last episode, vbScript does not allow strong typing, so you can't say, this is a Boolean or this is a string or whatever. Everything is a variant data type to start, and the other thing is you actually don't even need to declare these variables. It's optional to declare them in vbScript, but one of the nice things about declaring them is especially if you use something like Notepad++, well, it's going to put that into the sort of IntelliSense autocomplete there for the rest of your coding, which is really nice compared to using Notepad, which is a dog for doing this work. And so as you can see, I'm setting up my network folder. That's going to be the Orion server with the shared file share and test app folder, which is there. And then the deploy folder is going to be this C dev test app folder. And I'm going to set the front end file name to myfe.accdb, which is the one that is on the network share there, and then we can go ahead and start scripting here. We'll set our file system object, so that'll be a create object, just like we showed you in the last video for create access.application. Well, this time we're going to do create object, and we're creating a scripting file system object, which is going to allow us to work with files and folders and things like that. And so the scripting.filesystem object is incredibly handy for vbScript programmers, and it has all kinds of really neat functions in there. So after I've created that object, I can actually just say, this folder filesystem object.folder exists, and then specify the folder name, and then if it exists or not, and then I can say, does the front end file exist inside of the folder by checking the file exists function. And so that's going to return useful information that'll sort of help us to create our program flow. So from there we can say, if our folder exists is false, or our, the file, the FE exists equals false, because now we know, as the code runs, now we know if the folder exists or the file is not in the folder, and then we can do our actions accordingly. And so in here, this is the inside of the if statement. So if one of them does not exist, then we want to make sure that we deploy our, the whole front end with a, if necessary, a folder creation. But if it's not that case and the file is in there, when the user logs into their computer, we want to check and see if that file is up to date, because maybe the version is wrong. Maybe it's an old version, and if they run that, it's going to blow up the backend data because you made some changes or something like that. So this is going to make sure that the version is up to date, and it's going to update that file for the user. So we could say, deploy. We're going to also do a shortcut here. So that's what's going to happen. So if either of those doesn't exist, we're going to deploy the whole front end, including a shortcut. Otherwise, we're just going to check the version to see if the version is up to date. And so from there, we're going to do a little bit different, some things a bit differently than we did last time. because we're not just going to make a script that goes and runs all the way through. We're actually going to have the top part of our script, and we're going to have a couple of subroutines and a couple of functions, just like you see in VBA. It's almost exactly the same, works almost exactly the same way. And so that's what we're going to do here. So this make desktop shortcut, that'll be one that we need for sure, because if we're going to create a shortcut, we need to be able to do that. So we're going to make it so that we can just issue one command, make this desktop shortcut for this path. And so in order to do that, we're going to need a Windows script host shell, and we're going to need a shortcut object, and we're going to need the string for the user's desktop, because we don't, depending on the version of Windows, we don't know where that desktop is. So we're going to get that variable, and we're going to load it, and then we can basically use it after we've grabbed it. So we're going to set our shell equal to vbScript.shell, and we're going to create an object just like we did with the other ones there, and then we'll say we're going to get our desktop string. So what's the path to the user's desktop? And we can get that from the special folders in the shell there. So we're going to say get me the desktop string, so that now I have the full path to the user's desktop, and then I can set our shortcut object. We're going to set that to create shortcut, and we're going to set the path of that shortcut to the desktop folder, and then we'll just call this one myapp.lnk, because that's the name of our app. So then we'll say our target is equal to the path of the that we pass into this subroutine, and then we'll save it, and then we can set our shell equal to nothing, and then we're basically done. And so what this does is this is a nice little subroutine. The only thing that it does is it creates a shortcut for us with that path. So we're going to pass in the path of our ACCDB front-end file, which will be in the C drive somewhere, but we're going to put a shortcut to that on the user's desktop, which is very, very handy. So make note, like I said before, up above there, that's the code that runs immediately when the script is executed, but the subs and functions do not get executed unless they're called somewhere in that code up above. So that's an important distinction to make. So definitely make note of that, as that makes it much easier to understand, and we'll sort of move forward here. So just like we did with the previous subroutine, we're going to do the same thing, and in this case we're going to create a sub called do full deploy, and we're going to pass into this function, our file system object, where we want the file to come from, where it's going to go to, what the name of the file is, and whether or not the folder exists, so that we can create that folder if we need to put the file into. And so just like we did before, leave a little note at the top there, and we'll put in our variables here. So I'm going to use a message string that I'm going to build. I don't think there's much we really need here, because we're passing in most of the things that we need. I will be asking the user, so I'll put a little return value there, and then I'll just say, the string, our message is, the application, my app, needs to be deployed on your computer. Do you want to go ahead with that? So I'll say deploy to this computer, and I'll say, I'll put in some line breaks there. So the message is carriage return and line feed. I'll put two of those in the message so that it looks nicer, and then I'll say, would you like to proceed, kind of thing. And so what that's going to do is loading up the string like this into a message string makes it a little bit easier to work with. instead of having a giant long string inside of the function. Do you want to proceed with deployment? So now what we can do is we can actually just go down to the next line, and we can say, our return value is equal to, message box, and then we can put our message in. We don't have to put this massive long string in there going off the end like spaghetti. And we can say VB yes no plus VB question, so that's going to give us a yes no message box, and then the deploy my app, that'll go into the title of the message box so it looks a little bit nicer. So then we can say if the return value is yes, VB yes, then let's go ahead and deploy this. The user wants to do that. So then we can say, if the folder exists, we can check that. From here we can say, if the folder exists already, or if it doesn't exist, then create it. We can do that using the file system object that we passed into our function or into our subroutine here. And we'll say create folder, and then it'll be our deployment folder, and then we can move on, and we can say, we want to copy. We're going to copy in our network file to the local C drive file, our deployment folder. So we'll say path from, then we'll concatenate and put the file name on the end of that, so that we're actually grabbing that file out of that network folder. And then we'll say the destination is going to be the path 2. Again, we'll put the file name on there. Assuming you don't change the name of the file. This is where you could change if you want the local file name to be something different than the network file. Then you could change it right there, and that would allow you to have different names for those files. And then we'll use our make desktop shortcut. Now that we have a file in our file folder, we can create the desktop shortcut for the path 2 with the front end file, and that's going to put that on the desktop for the user. And then we can say, my app has been deployed, and we'll use a VB information, which will put a little information icon on that pop-up and put deployment into the title of that one. And so now we pretty much have everything that we need. We've got our do full deployment subroutine. We can check that over. It doesn't look too bad. So we need to pass in our objects that we created up above there. But now we have the ability, and like I said before, all of this code here gets executed right away, but the subs and functions are not executed until they are actually called somewhere in the code here. And so we're going to do that now, because like we said, if the folder doesn't exist or the file is not in there, then we're going to do a full deployment, and we're going to pass in our file system object, the network folder, the deployment folder, the front end file name, and whether or not the folder exists. And so we can do everything there in one line, which is great. We're going to make use of that shortcut subroutine. We use that in our do full deployment, and then we're going to use do full deployment in the first part of the if, else, and if program flow there. And so we could test this out. I mean, it might be broken, I'm not sure, but we'll see if I have any spelling errors in there or typos. So this is the test out folder, and if I double click this little script here, looks like it compiled because it did start. Okay, so the application my app needs to be deployed to this computer. Do you want to proceed with deployment? And you could click no, and it shouldn't do anything if you say no. But you could also double click it, and it will go ahead and check that, and you could say yes. And then, it looks like it deployed. So now I could click OK, and as you can see, it was off of our our recording window here, but the little shortcut did get created. If I double click the shortcut, it opens up the front end file, which is in the local C drive deployment directory, which is exactly what we want. And it is linked to those backend tables because it was saved that way when we deployed it. And that is exactly what we want to see for that one. And so moving on, what we need to do now is we need to do the second part of that if and else, or pardon me, if else and if, because we've got, as you can see, we've handled the part where, you know, it's just not deployed on that computer yet at all. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and check the version to see if the version is up to date, because it has been deployed, and we want to just copy the file over if it's needed. And so it follows that if we want to be able to check our version in each of those, you know, the network version and the local version, then we're going to need a function to go get that version for us so that we can compare, because we're going to reuse this function twice. We'll use it to get the network copy version, and since the file is the same way, it's built the same way on the local version, we can also use it for the local version. And so we can reuse this function twice, and that makes it a bit better for, you know, reusability. So we'll leave a comment at the top of our function here, return the version of a front-end file, whether or not it's stored on the network or locally. And for this one, we're going to set up our variables just like we did before. This will be similar actually to the procedure that we did in the previous episode where I introduced vbScript, and we're going to use a lot of the same stuff that we used in that one. And so what we can do here is, you know, just like we did in our previous episode there, see up above here, I still have it open actually. We're going to set our app variable. We're going to create an access.application variable that we can use to open tables and look at data and compare things and do automation if we need to. But in this case, we're just going to set our workspace, that's the WKS there, equal to the database engine 0, which is the default workspace, and then we'll set our DB. We're going to open DB using wks.open database and the file that we pass into, the file string that we pass into it. And so this is very useful because then we can pass in different file names into it, you know, different paths, and this function will do the same thing each time, but it'll just look in different places. And so we'll set our record set equal to db.openRecordSet, and we're going to grab that FE there. This is in the test app folder, and if I open the FE settings table, you can see that there's a setting name called version, and it has a value of 1.1. And so that's the value, or the field name setting value that we want from this FE settings table. And we'll grab the setting where the name is equal to the word version. And so we'll check that out. We'll put the version in single quotes since we're putting everything in double quotes, and so that record set is going to be open that way. I was going to put a db open snapshot on here, although I think I might need to go and find the actual number for that in order to use that in vbScript. That opens a read-only data set, which might be a little less obtrusive basically, but for today what I'll do is I'm going to skip that. We can come back to that, and I can maybe put that in the comments. The db open dynaset, which is the default, versus db open snapshot, which is the read-only version of it. And so now we've got a record set open with one record in it, and we can say, hey, our version string, str version, is equal to the 2 quotes. Now I put 2 quotes and the value. That's in case there's a null in there, and that's going to auto convert that over to a string, because it's going to concatenate the string with the null, and it can help you to avoid some errors there. And so we'll go ahead, we'll close our record set, we'll set our variables equal to nothing, and then just like we did in our previous episode, we're going to do app.quit, so we make sure that, access in the background there that has opened and we're manipulating it, it's going to quit because we don't want to leave that running. And then we'll set get version equal to our version string, and that will be the return value for this function. And so as you can see, we did the same thing as we did in our previous video there. We've got pretty much everything the same. We set up our app variable, workspace, and our database and record set, and then we opened our record set and got a value from there, and then we closed that and closed the database, and that was nice and easy for us to do without needing any, doing connections via, ODBC or something like that, or OLEDB. We can actually just open the file and use access and get the values and open record sets. It's a nice way of doing it. And then we can start our next function, which is the last function. Now in our last function, what we're going to do is we're going to call this one up to date, and in this function we're going to pass in the network copy of the file and the local copy of the file, the name, the names with the network path attached to them, so that we can compare them, so we can say yes or no, this is up to date, whatever this file is. And so I'll create my variables. I'll say, there's a network version and a local version that we're going to get, and then after we load those, we're going to compare them, and we're going to produce a variable, a Boolean it says up to date. And so and then we'll use Boolean up to date to be the return value for version up to date function. And so what we'll do is we'll say we're going to set the initial value of Boolean up to date equal to false, and it's going to stay false all the way through the procedure unless it gets switched to true. And so if conditions are not met to switch it to true, it just stays false. It makes it to the end of the function, and then the function value, return value, becomes false. And so now that we created the get version function, now we can just say our network version is equal to get version. So if you look up here, that's the function that we created just now, so we can say get the version. So and then we can pass in the network copy path, and then we can say the local version is equal to the get version of the local copy, and local copies there, and then we can compare them easily. You could do your own comparison if it's less or greater or whatever. In this case, I'll just say if the local version is equal to the network version, then we'll set the is up to date is equal to true, and then we'll just say end if, and then that's all there is to it. So we're going to get our network version, get our local version, we're going to compare them, and then we'll return whether or not the local version is up to date. And so we can go ahead and we can use that function now in our code that is being executed, and we can just say yeah, it's very, very easy. So now we can go ahead and say, our local is current variable, Boolean variable is equal to our version comparison function, which is called version up to date. So local version is current is equal to version up to date, and then we can pass in the network folder and the file name, just like we did before there. And then we'll pass also in, as the second comparison, the local one. So we'll say compare to the local deploy folder, and then the file, and then that will give us a yes or no, whether it's up to date. And so, if it is not up to date, then we'll do an update, or we'll ask the user and then do an update, or you can force it through. So we'll say if the local copy is false, then we can go ahead and say, we'll create a message, just like we did before. We'll say my app needs to be updated with the current version. Would you like to do that? And this is assuming that maybe in your front end code you have something that will not let the user start if the version's not up to date. So if they go back and start it, then it will fail. But in this case, we will ask the user. We'll say, do you want to go ahead and do that? So we can use our return value variable again, and we'll load that using message box, using our string VB yes no plus question, just like we did before, to make it a little bit nicer than just a vanilla message box. And then we can say if var ret val, we'll scroll it down here a bit, and we'll say if var ret val is equal to yes, then we'll proceed. So we'll say if the user clicks yes as opposed to no, then we'll go ahead and do this. So we'll say end if, and then from there we can just do our copy, which the default is to copy over the file. So you might need to make sure that the file is closed if they have it open. That would be something that we could look at in another episode. But in this case, it's just going to copy over the file, and if this is running in their startup folder, it's unlikely that they will start the file. They will start their file before this runs. So that's a good place to put it, either startup, or there's other ways that you can schedule this little script to run. So we'll say copy the network to the local, and then you can give them a message, say, my app was updated with an information, VB information type, and then that's a nice tight little procedure to, it'll check. Now it'll check whether it's even been deployed at all and do a full deployment. Otherwise, it'll check the version and only update it if it really needs to be updated. Some people have really big front-end files that are full of code and all kinds of stuff, and you really don't want to be updating across the network all the time to users' local computers unless it's really needed. So this looks pretty good. I don't think I should get any errors there, but we'll see. So I'm gonna go ahead and if I double click on the setup, you'll see nothing happens because this one that's in there is actually up to date. It's one that we ran just a few minutes ago, and if I update, or if I look at that file, the local front end file, you can see it's local because these are all network tables, and then this local table here is it's got 1.1 in there. But I'm going to change that back to say 1.0. In my C drive folder there, the deployment folder. Now if I run this, now I should get a message if it opens up both of those. Yeah, okay, it ran it. So it says update. My app needs to be updated with the current version. Would you like to do that now? And you could say no, and it does nothing. But if the next time you log in, maybe the app or the user didn't use the app, and then next time they log in they're going to be hounded again, and you could say yes, and then it will say my app was updated, and you can click OK. And that's really what we wanted to see there. If I go back and I run it again, now you can see nothing happens because the app is up to date, the front end file. And if I run it again and again, it doesn't really matter. It does go and check those, so it is running each time the user logs into their computer. If this is sitting in their startup folder, that's exactly what we want to see there. And you could do lots of different ways or different things here. If you wanted to do things like link tables, you could use that app variable in the main procedure there to do app.docommand.transfer database, and then link to your access tables or ODBC tables or whatever. I could do another episode on that. If you guys are interested, make sure to let me know, and we can go from there. But that is how you can do a deployment script using vbScript for your Access front-end database in Microsoft Access. Are you hiring programmers for your next project? Make sure to check out the extra links in the description. Hope you enjoyed today's discussion on how to do a deploy script in vbScript. If you like what you saw today, please make sure to give the video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Click the bell when you see the bell, and if you have any questions or comments, please put those in the comment section below. Have a great day, have a safe day, and I'll catch you next time.